Good to worship the Lord with you together this morning. And we're going to continue our sermon series in Mark's Gospel. So if you want to open your Bibles to Mark chapter 8, that's where we're going to be. Really with the focus of knowing that Jesus, when Jesus came on the scene, he changed everything. And so his way, while it may have become familiar to some of us who have been raised in church, or even to a society and culture that has been significantly impacted by the morals and values of Jesus and his teachings, that he is a radically different thing than what people were expecting. He's a radically different king than what people were expecting. It should radically change our lives as well. And so we're going to be in Mark chapter 8 this morning. If you don't have a Bible, there's Bibles in the back rack. If you don't have a Bible that you love to read, of course, you can grab one of those and take it with you. We'd love for you to open the Bible and read it for yourself all throughout the week. And be changed by what God would have to say to you within that. While you're turning to Mark chapter 8, let me ask you this question. There's 3 encounters that we're going to read about this morning, and they all have to do with sight. So I was thinking as our kids were getting ready to go back to school, and sometimes you take them to the eye doctor and all of those things. How many of you remember the eye doctor appointments? Some of you have been there recently. E at the top and then FP. I got my first pair of glasses in 3rd grade, and so I had this chart memorized almost, at least when I was wearing glasses. And then I started wearing glasses and I got into basketball, and I'll tell you what, I was like the Dennis Rodman of Overlook Elementary School. I couldn't shoot or pass, but I could rebound. And so I broke many, many pairs of glasses before I talked my parents into contact lenses. But do you remember this? Or maybe you've been recently and you just had this thing on your face, the most beautiful pair of glasses that you've ever seen. And you stick your eyes in there, and the eye doctor flips the lenses back and forth, and he says, "What's better, 1 or 2? 1 or 2? 3 or 4? Man, Dr. Bernard was my eye doctor growing up, and we had a lot of times behind those glasses together. And so some of us don't realize how blind we are until we go to the eye doctor and we put some lenses on and come to an understanding of what clear vision could actually look like. And today in our passage, we're going to walk through where Jesus performs a healing that kind of looks like a failed eye exam. We'll see at the end that a blind man gets his sight back, but it takes Jesus 2 attempts to get him to the place of being fully able to see. It's not just about his eyes, though. You'll find out that this story is kind of a parable in motion for the other encounters that we'll read about. And here's kind of the truth that we'll talk about. While many of us can see physically, there are many people that we know, maybe even ourselves, that are blind spiritually or have some level of difficulty seeing what God may be doing in the world or what God may desire to do in our lives or through our lives. When it comes to eyesight, there's a big difference between people who can't see and people who don't want to see. When it comes to our spiritual eyesight and seeing how God is at work in the world, there's a big difference between people who can't see and people who won't or don't want to see. We call these things that we can't see in our lives blind spots. We've been teaching our 15 and a half year old daughter how to drive. Yesterday we were out for a little over an hour driving through the roads out away from civilization, and she's doing a great job driving. But we were talking about the idea of blind spots and how there's blind spots on your car, right? You can see things in the side mirrors, but you can't see everything. There's things that are there or could be there that you can't necessarily see unless you choose to look for them. There's a difference as well between having a blind spot that we just need God's revelation for in our own life to learn more about us or to learn an aspect of his character that we're not quite familiar with yet, versus the opposite of a blind spot, which is just ignoring reality. Some things are there, but we just haven't chosen to look yet, and some things we know are there, but we refuse to look. We're not ready to deal with that issue. We're not ready to go to that depth with the Lord. And that's what we're going to find out today in this passage. So let me pray, and we'll jump into chapter 8, starting in verse 10. So Heavenly Father, would you come and teach us by your Spirit through the Scriptures? Would you help us to align ourselves to you? Would you open our eyes that we'd be able to see you more today? It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So Mark chapter 8. Starting in verse 10. Immediately after this, he got into a boat with his disciples and crossed over to the region of Dalmanutha. And so right after this, if you haven't been with us in the series, Jesus has just performed a series of miracles, including how Mark records that he fed 5,000 people with just a few loaves and fishes. And then also Mark records that he just fed 4,000 people. So there's these two encounters of miraculous things, in addition to him delivering people from unclean spirits and healing people supernaturally, ministering to many different people. Mark summarizes and says, after all of these things, he gets into a boat with his disciples and crosses over to the region of Dalmanutha. When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had arrived, they came and started to argue with him, because that's what they love to do with Jesus. Testing him, they demanded that he show them a miraculous sign from heaven to prove his authority, which is ironic after what he had just done. When he heard this, he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why do these people keep demanding a miraculous sign? I tell you the truth, I will not give this generation any such sign." So he got back into the boat and left them, and he crossed to the other side of the lake. So the Pharisees are demanding for a sign from heaven, for Jesus to prove that he's from God, which is absolutely comical. You see, the one who had already healed the sick, already fed thousands, calmed storm, cast out demons, is standing right there in front of them. What more could they need from God? They wanted Elijah's fire from heaven, or Joshua's stopping the sun in the sky, or Moses' 24 hours of darkness in Egypt. They wanted to see something in the heavenlies, the sun, moon, and stars fall in line with the commands of Jesus. And it made me kind of ask this question that maybe some of us or some of the people in our lives that we're praying for and asking God to draw to himself. But why do we so often look for a sign when the Savior is standing right in front of us? Why do we try to coerce God to do something for us when he's made himself known and he wants to reveal himself to us? So here's the problem with the Pharisees' question, and maybe some of the things that we wrestle in our own hearts as well, is that the reality is, Mark already said that they were trying to test him. We know that they weren't looking for the truth. They were looking for a loophole in all of this. They were looking for a way to disprove Jesus, to disbelieve Jesus, to say that my way is right and his way is wrong. They didn't really even want a sign to believe, because he had shown them the kingdom power that he brought in healing people and setting people free, feeding those who were hungry. They didn't want a sign to believe. They wanted a sign to control the narrative. And this is why so many of us ask for signs so often, is because we want to trust in our interpretation of what we believe instead of God's revelation to who we are, to what we need. We want God on our terms. The Pharisees wanted Jesus on their terms. We often approach God like we're negotiating a contract. God, if you heal me, I'll trust you. If you fix my job situation, then I'll start giving financially. If you give me this sign, then I'll obey. This is what the Pharisees were asking for, and Jesus' response shows the deep level of anguish that this brought him. In verse 12, Mark says that he sighed deeply in his spirit. Have you ever just been so kind of disappointed and tired that you just kind of go, this is how Jesus was feeling towards the Pharisees who weren't looking for truth. They were just looking for their way to be validated. They were looking for God, to coerce God to be on their side. He's not frustrated because he can't perform the sign that they're asking for. He's heartbroken because they refuse to see what's already in front of them. He says, no sign will be given to this generation, not because he can't do it, not because he doesn't want to do it, but he knows it won't help them. Their heart has been hardened. In other words, Jesus is saying, I'm not your magician on demand. I'm the Messiah. You don't test me, you trust me. When it comes to Jesus, the posture towards him is exactly what he taught us when he taught the disciples to pray. Your will be done. Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. Not my will, your will. You see, spiritual sight will never come through the ultimatums that we give God. It only comes through surrendering our will to God. Ultimatums, God, if you do this, then I'll do this. And listen, I've done this, trying to get out of addiction, trying to find freedom. Early on in my journey, this was my bargaining chip with God. God, if you do this, if you set me free, if I never have to struggle with this sin again, then I'll commit my life to you. I'll give my life to you. I'll go wherever you want me to go. And I realized that ultimatum ultimately was me staying in control of what God wanted to do. Our ultimatums are an attempt to maintain control, whereas surrender puts God in control. No wonder not many people do it. It's scary to give up control. It's scary to release God into your life. It can feel like we don't have a say, which really we have the opportunity to join with him in what he wants to do. And we can only have the beginnings of spiritual sight and begin to see clearly when we stop holding God hostage to our demands and instead trust him because of who he is. Not because he's checked all of our boxes. You see, God is not auditioning for the role of your personal assistant. He's Lord. He's King, which means we trust him before we see the outcome. Charles Stanley, notable pastor who passed away recently from Atlanta, Georgia, he said this: I obey God and I trust him with the rest. I choose to obey God and I trust him with the rest. We trust him before we see the outcome because he's worthy. And so we have these Pharisees who are demanding to see a sign, and of course, that's not going to happen. And so Jesus and his disciples leave. In verse 14, we pick up this next encounter. But the disciples had forgotten to bring any food. They had only one loaf of bread with them in the boat. As they were crossing the lake, Jesus warned them, "Watch out. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and of Herod." You can see that Jesus' heart is still grieving and mourning from this interaction. They're setting sail through the Sea of Galilee, and they're thinking about what they're going to have for lunch, and Jesus is just thinking, man, guys, that was not great. We got to keep watch because we don't want to become like them. At this, they began to argue with each other because they hadn't brought any bread. Jesus knew what they were saying, so he said, "What are you doing? Why are you arguing about having no bread? Don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, Can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you take up afterward? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftover did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? Why are you worried about just having 1 loaf of bread? I've got it, guys. So quickly, the disciples forgot who Jesus is and what he could actually do. They're thinking about bread. Jesus is warning them about the yeast of the Pharisees and Herod. Jesus and the disciples are in a boat. They've got 13 guys, 1 loaf, and they're whispering like anxious interns at a church potluck. Jesus, overhearing their conversation, warns them, watch out for the leaven. Watch out for the leaven, not about the bread, but about the leaven. See, in ancient Jewish culture, leaven represents corruption or sin. The Pharisees' leaven represents religious pride and hypocrisy, self-righteousness, self-justification, judgment towards others. Herod's leaven, Herod would have been the king. It represents political power, worldliness, self-indulgence, compromise. Both of these things are easily contagious. Both of these things, even for Jesus' followers, can be like yeast in a dough. A little of it spreads through the whole batch. Some modern examples of leaven that we might deal with is that little spark of cynicism and criticism that if we don't check and bring to the Lord spreads through until nothing is soft in our hearts anymore. It's just judgment and cynicism. Or a me first attitude where the invitation to serving feels like something that's optional and I don't have time for this. Look at everything else I'm doing with my life. Or a habit of just measuring God's work in myself and others only in what they produce and what we see externally. Oh, you're not doing this. Oh, you haven't been here. Oh, you haven't talked to this person. You haven't seen God move in this way through your life. See, the disciples are totally missing the point, and this is why this encounter and part of their journey is so important for us. Because their focus is on bread, and Jesus chastises them, not because he's concerned about missing lunch, but he's concerned about them missing the point, missing who he is. He just had this encounter with the Pharisees who have been testing him for all of this time of his public ministry. You would think his closest followers would kind of have this figured out at this point. He's not angry, he's grieved. They're so close, but they still don't get it. They think Jesus is upset about the loaf of bread. Modern ways that we can apply this. Have you ever been so focused on your problems that you forget that what God did just last week? Has there ever been something right in front of your face that seems like an overwhelming barrier, block, or wall, a relational issue, and you forget that he just answered your prayer a few days ago? And we get worried and self-consumed. Our focus becomes unfixed from who he is and what he's done and becomes fixed on this thing right here and right now. We panic about money after God provided last month. We stress about our kids after God answered the last prayer that we were praying for them. We're so quick to worry. We're so quick to be concerned about the thing that I'm dealing with. Jesus is saying to them, you're worried about bread. I'm the bread of life. I'm right here. Here's what we learn from this, that sometimes spiritual blindness isn't from rebellion like with the Pharisees, but from distraction. We can miss what God desires to do in us and through us, what he's trying to say to us, the blind spots that he's trying to reveal to us, not because we're blatantly running from him, but because we've filled our schedule and our priorities with everything else, that they become distractions from him. We're so focused on what's urgent that we miss what is of ultimate importance. We might find ourselves doing this when we're watching the news more than we're reading our Bibles. We're chasing deadlines for our jobs, but we're neglecting time in prayer. We're making sure our kids get into the right schools, but we're not necessarily making sure that they're knowing and following Jesus and see him as good and true and beautiful. Jesus' disciples weren't hostile towards him like the Pharisees, and so maybe we're not hostile towards Jesus either. They were just preoccupied. Are there things in your life that you find are preoccupying you instead of having your attention and focus on the one who is right there before you? And so Jesus is always trying to teach truths to his disciples, and that's where we have this final encounter. In verse 22, it says, when they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, and they begged him to touch the man and heal him. Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Then, spitting on the man's eyes, he laid his hands on him and asked, "Can you see anything now?" It's a weird way to heal somebody, Jesus. The man looked around. "Yes," he said, "I see clearly, but I can't see them, or I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around." Then Jesus placed his hands on the man's eyes again, and his eyes were open. His sight was completely restored, and he could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him away, saying, "Don't go back into the village on your way home." All right, Jesus heals this man in a two-step process, right? Spits on his eyes. He kind of can see, might be the spit getting in the way. I don't know what it is. Can you see? Not entirely. And then he comes back for a second round, and the man is healed and able to see completely. This is the only passage in the entire New Testament where we see Jesus needing more than one attempt to heal somebody. And maybe needing more than one attempt is not the right way of saying this. The fact is, he could have fully healed this man's blindness from the beginning. This is truly a living parable meant to teach his disciples that their spiritual sight will be a gradual process, just like this man's physical sight has been a gradual process. Jesus isn't short on power. He didn't come up short in the first attempt. He's teaching his disciples that they need to continue to press in. Just because they have the privilege of being his disciples doesn't mean they have it all figured out yet. And very truly, this is where we're going in Mark's gospel, to the point where Jesus proclaims one of the hardest things about his reality. So come back next week about when he says, "Listen, I came to suffer." And it leads to Peter's confession of who Jesus really is. They're on this journey. And so if you feel like sometimes it's hard to see what God is doing in your life, sometimes you don't feel like you have the entire story, you don't have the end of the story, sometimes your faith feels fuzzy, you're not alone. It's okay. We're in this journey of coming to Jesus and allowing him to apply his power and grace and mercy in our lives. Don't be discouraged if you can't see it all right now. Growth, spiritual vision takes time. Sometimes, and maybe there's things in your life that when you prayed and God answered, and it felt like this immediate thing that changed in your life. And then sometimes there's the regular meeting with Jesus where over the course of time, in the budding growth of your friendship with him, he points things out as we're ready to deal with them. Can you imagine if God showed you everything wrong with you all at once? That would bury us. It'd bury me under the weight of my own guilt and shame, and I can't believe I still haven't figured out. God's grace is experienced over the course of his patience with us. He's patient. I love the Old Testament phrase that describes God's patience. It's called long suffering. Don't you just love that? It's like it feels really sweet to be patient with someone, but when you know you're engaging in long suffering, like I'm going to deal with your stupidity for a long time, Josh, you're going to cause me long suffering. But he's patient with us. He's willing to press in and endure. One wrong move or one thing where we choose to go our way instead of his way isn't going to scare him away. He invites us back over and over again. If he exposed every flaw in our hearts in a single moment, it might cause us to despair and lose hope. But in his kindness, he applies the healing that we need when we need it. He applies the sight that we need when we need it, and always gives us the invitation to come back for more. Sometimes knowing and understanding what God desires to do in and through our lives is a one step at a time journey. So just take the next step. You don't have to trust him for the finish line. Just trust him for the next step. I love this prayer that Paul prays. Paul picks up on some of these things. And in Ephesians chapter 1, as writing to this church of new believers who are growing in their faith, he says this: I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which he has called you, the riches of his glorious inheritance in his holy people, and his incomparable great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. Paul is praying for these people, and it's my prayer for you today that we would be people that would ask God to open the eyes of our hearts, to receive from him the spirit of wisdom and revelation that we might know him more. You might not see entirely right now, but it doesn't mean that is the end of what God desires to do in our lives. So as the worship team comes up, here are the prayers that I just want us to pray. Would you be willing today to ask God to open your eyes to his hope? Paul says that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which he's called you to. Would you ask God to open your eyes to hope? If there's something that feels hopeless, something that feels impossible to overcome, something that feels like you're just running into a dead end, running into a brick wall, will you ask him to open your eyes to see the hope, the future, the possibility that he can do in that? We don't want to just see our problems and set our eyes on the fact that we don't have enough bread to go around. We want to fix our eyes on his promises, that he promises to be with us and to lead us through. Secondly, would you be willing to ask God to show you your inheritance? That this persevering and pressing in is worth it. That there's a reward that he is preparing for each and every one of us that follow him. That we would realize that even now we have access to riches and power and his presence beyond what we often tap into. And thirdly, would you ask God to make his power real in your life? Paul says that pray that the eyes of your heart would be open so that you would know the incomparable great power for us who believe. That power is the same as the mighty strength he exerted when he raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms. Would you open our eyes to see that the same power that raised Jesus from the dead can work through us for the sake of giving life to others. The same power that enthroned Jesus is at work through us as we surrender control, as we put down ultimatums, as we refuse to just find the loopholes in this journey and we keep our eyes fixed on you. Open the eyes of our hearts. Give us your spirit of wisdom and revelation that we would know you more. For the things that we know about you but we don't feel about you, would you do the miraculous work through your spirit of making that journey from knowledge to our hearts? That we would know that you're good and we would feel that you're good. We would live like you're good. That we would know that you love us, but that we would feel your love for us. You would pour out your love in our hearts, and that we would live as dearly loved people. We would know that you can bring peace in impossible situations, and that you can provide even though it feels like it's beyond what is possible, that you can heal the things that we don't know how to heal. But would you allow that truth to sink into our hearts? And would we live? Would we live as people who see you heal, see you do the impossible, receive your provision and be a part of your provision for others, hope in your power, and allow you to do things that are far beyond what we could possibly accomplish in our own? Lord, for the people in our lives that are like the Pharisees, they're looking everywhere else. They're trying to find any possible option but to look to you. I pray that we would be able to be attractive examples of what it means to trust you. That we'd be able to live lives that draw people into the questions of what does it really mean to trust and follow Jesus? Lord, would you do the miraculous work? I so often go, I don't know how these Pharisees haven't had this thing figure out. The reality is that for many of them, it took not just your death, but your resurrection. That there would be something so mind-blowing that happened in their lives that then they came to you. Many of the religious leaders and Pharisees came and trusted in Jesus after you were raised from the dead. For those people in our lives, Lord, would you do something miraculous? Would you show them your life and your love? Would you draw them to yourselves?